Just try explaining how the billions of dollars that Norway gets from offshore oil and gas allows it to boast that it's one of the greenest countries on earth. We'll attempt to do just that as we wait for a court ruling that could decide the country's financial future. This is Roundtable. Hello from me, David Foster. Oslo was Europe's green capital last year, yet it gets so much money from its fossil fuels that it is actually one of the biggest contributors to global pollution. Now, a group of young people is aiming to change that. Norway has long been praised for its green credentials, renewable sources providing almost all of its electricity. Article 112 of the country's constitution provides current and future citizens a right to a livable environment. But although it's a leader in some aspects of climate change, it relies heavily on fossil fuels for its income. And that's known as the Norwegian paradox. It is the third largest producer of natural gas in the world and the eighth largest oil producer, making it the source of roughly 100 times the world's average emissions per person. Climate NGOs argue that continuing to issue licenses for oil and gas exploration, especially in the Arctic, is unconstitutional and violates the Paris Agreement provisions. A verdict from the Supreme Court is expected soon. If the case is successful, it would be the first to use the Paris Agreement as grounds for halting fossil fuel drilling. It could lead to many other such cases around the world. For now, though, it's planet versus profit in what's being dubbed Norway's case of the century. Well, we can head to the Norwegian capital, Oslo, say hello to Andreas Randøy, Deputy Head of Nature and Youth, one of the groups that brought this lawsuit. We go to Stavanger in Norway and welcome Hilde-Marit Rysst, leader of the labour union SAFE, which represents energy and oil workers. And back to Oslo, and we see Hans-Petter Graver, Professor of Law at the University of Oslo. Hans-Petter, let me come to you first of all, since this is a legal point. When are we expecting to hear a verdict?
Well, the court hasn't given a set date yet, but we expect around New Year's, so probably early January.
And what kind of impact will it have, whichever way it goes, on Norwegian society?
Well, if the claim is rejected, I don't think it'll have a large impact. It depends, of course, on the reasoning, because if they reject straight out that there are no individual rights under the Constitution to the environment, I think many will be disappointed, particularly the environmental organizations and also some of the political parties. But if they uphold the claim and say that these licenses are invalid, it can potentially have a huge impact on Norwegian society.
And just one more legal point before we broaden the discussion. Is this about drilling per se, any new licenses in Norwegian waters, or just about in the Arctic?
Well, that depends again too, because the arguments that the claimants have brought is twofold. One is general, that the opening of new licenses and the extraction of mineral resources contributes to global warming and should be prohibited. And of course, that is not dependent on where this is extracted. The other argument is based on the vulnerability of the environment, particularly in the Arctic. And if the court bases its ruling on this claim, then of course it pertains only to this environment.
Andreas, let me come to you and we'll talk about damage here. First of all, the damage you think these new licenses, this drilling could do to the environment. What do you think could be the worst that could happen?
Well, Arctic oil drilling is really quite a scary concept. This is oil drilling further north than we've ever gone before, and marine scientists, they tell us that this is one of the most valuable and vulnerable areas in the whole world. So if there is a big accident, an oil spill, that could be catastrophic, but also just pollution from extraction of the oil will have a negative impact on the environment. And then, of course, if we find a lot of oil, that would be detrimental to the climate.
And let's talk about damage to the Norwegian economy. Without this oil money over the years, you wouldn't have had a health system, you wouldn't have had the education that you've had. This could be ruinous financially for Norway. Well,
Sweden, Denmark, and Finland are quite similar countries to Norway, and they don't have a big fossil fuel economy. So I think it's very possible to have a welfare state without contributing to climate change.
But your country will not be as well off if your claim goes through as it was before, financially at least.
Well, yes, that's true. I do think that it will have a cost, but we know that the world has found more oil, coal, and gas than we can ever dig up and use if we are to prevent catastrophic climate change. And what country is better fitted to make that transition than Norway? We have a large economy, a well-educated population. If anyone can make that transition, I think it can be Norway.
Hilde-Marit, it's time to make a break with the past. This is not compatible with the cleaner, safer, greener world that everybody wants to see, I would imagine.
Yes, I think, of course, we have to go further. And the Norwegian people are one of the best in the world to make it happen. And we are going to start this transmission, that's for sure. The fossil energy are just as that. They are fossil, and it's an end to it. And we are going to start to be with the change for renewable energy. And to do that, we have to go together and step by step. We can't just stop. The oil we have by now, oil and gas we have by now, it's just enough for some years. And then we have to have new findings to have more, just to the income for Norway, of course, but also to create energy to the world.
But are you simply talking about the jobs that will be lost? Because Norway itself doesn't use much of this oil or gas. It sends it overseas where it's burnt by other countries. Are you just worried about, 3 to 4% of the Norwegian workforce, which is in the energy sector? You're just worried about that because presumably they could transition to greener jobs.
Yeah, and they have to transition to greener jobs, and they want to because we are used to transmission every day. But we also make the best energy, the best fossil energy in the world. We make here in Norway, and we send it out to other parts of the world. And I think that's a good thing, much better than coal works in China, for example. We take a big responsibility for environment at the full. We pay taxes and fees for everything we let out to the atmosphere from Norwegian sokkel, and we also pay big money down to climate-friendly projects.
Seriously, Norway does not do this when it comes to the oil and gas that it exports. All of those taxes are paid by those other countries. All of the emissions, the pollution are endured by those other countries. How can Norway be so hypocritical to take all this money and say it is one of the greenest countries on earth when it's actually exporting pollution?
But I don't think you can say it like that, because we are paying taxes and fees to our own government for everything we produce out there. That is one of the reasons why we are the best in the world to produce in the greenest way, because it's too expensive not to using the best production ways we can. So it's not a coincidence that we in Norway are the best HMS results when we talk about our producing, because it's too much money involved, and it will cost us too much not to be in front of the way we produce.
So not hypocritical in the slightest?
No, I don't think so, because we try to. We do it the best way we can, the most green way, and we also take responsibility otherwise in the world, trying to support the countries who need it. We are supporting the Rainforest Fund and many other things. So we are using the money in a very good way and trying to help just our own country, but also in the world. I'm proud.
Hans Petter, Sorry to interrupt you. Hans-Petter, you've advised the government on the ethical ways it should or should not invest its massive sovereign wealth fund. So I'm going to come to you and ask you about suggestions, as I've just put there, that this is a hypocritical stance. You make billions and billions and billions out of selling oil elsewhere where it's burned and creates pollution. And at the same time, Norway holds its hands up and says, look how green we are.
Well, that argument is often made, and I think these are actually two different things: the way we should invest this money, and the way we should accumulate this money. If we should accumulate it through extraction of fossil fuel and oil and gas. I think the argument is that once we have this money, we should invest it in an ethical, responsible way. But also, the ethical responsibility includes preserving the money for future generations, because this is a non-renewable resource that we extract from Norwegian territory and from future generations, and then the value of this should be preserved for future generations. So how we invest that money and the ethical guidelines is, of course, a question for itself. This court case, of course, this only goes to the issue of the environmental effects of exploration and extraction of new mineral resources. And as we were talking about, the vulnerable environment in the Arctic. But I think the main issue and the most important issue of the case is exactly this that relates to global warming. And the argument that is made is that once you extract these resources from the ground, you bring the carbon into the carbon circuit, which means it will end up in the atmosphere and will contribute to global warming, disregarding whether the actual fuels are burnt then in Norway or abroad. So the argument that is made is that it is the responsibility of Norwegian society and the government of Norway, the contribution that all of this oil and gas makes to global warming, even if it is under international agreements then burnt by other countries and under their obligations under, for example, the Paris Accord and other agreements.
Well, we'll get on to the Paris Accord, if we may, in a little bit more detail in a moment. Thank you for the right now, Hans-Petter. Andreas, let me come back to you and ask you what kind of obstacles, if any, have been put in your way in trying to bring this lawsuit?
Well, it's as a climate activist, it's very obvious to us that we're fighting against the largest industry in Norway. They have a lot of lobbyists, a lot of politicians are on their side, and they can always talk about labor and the job market, and there's a lot of false information about what we're saying. I don't want anyone to lose their jobs, for example. I want to create green jobs to make a just transition for oil workers. But I don't think that hunkering down on the fossil path is the way to create that transition.
Let's examine something that was said by David Boyd, UN Special Rapporteur on the Environment and Human Rights. I'll come to you first of all, Andreas, and then to you, Hilde-Marit. He wrote, from a climate change perspective, it's irrelevant where on earth fossil fuels are burned. The emissions exacerbate the global climate emergency. There is no such thing as clean coal or clean oil, only varying degrees of dirty. Has Norway kept to any of its green promises, Andreas, when it comes to something like this? Or is it a little bit like somebody in Afghanistan who produces opium saying, listen, we don't use it here, we don't use heroin very much, we just give it out to the rest of the world, we're okay?
Yeah, and also they create the cleanest heroin, I assume. Norway is one of the best at being one of the worst in terms of climate. It, as you say, it doesn't make any sense to talk about clean oil. We know that the world has already found more oil and gas than we can ever use, and it's obviously just the technicality that the oil is burned in other countries. And the Norwegian government doesn't want to take responsibility for the oil burned in other countries, but the Court of Appeals in this court case actually agreed with us that it doesn't matter if the oil is burned in Norway or in other countries. So I'm very happy about that.
Hilde-Marit, no such thing as clean oil or clean coal.
No, I think a fact is a fact. It's nothing to try to keep out. But you also have to see that we are agreeing. The most countries in the world are agreeing about the UN's sustainable goals. We supposed to meet in 2030. That's less than 10 years from now. Then all of the world are going to have no more poor, and they are going to have a good environment to live in. They are going to have warm in their houses. They're going to have lights in their lamps, and they're going to learn how to read, go to school, education, everything. We want that for everyone.
But let me ask you this. Please,
Yeah.
sorry, I just want to come in here. The Constitution, which says that everybody has a right to a healthy environment. If the young people and those also opposed to this lose this case, and you get what you want, which is for the drilling and prospecting to be allowed to continue, are you not denying people in your country the right to a healthy environment?
No, because I mean it's not. The important thing is that the world needs more energy, and if we are going to try to reach the UN sustainable goals, then we need extremely much more energy. And then we have per now so and so much fossil, and we have to invent the new renewable energy. And the projecting about finding out the renewable energy, we have to stand together. And I think also as Nature Youth that Norway is one of the countries in the world who really can make that happen, because we have a very high competent people, and we also have high standards in the schools, and we have this lots of money in the bank. So we should lead the transmission to the renewable energy.
Well, perhaps to some extent you are making the case that Norway doesn't actually need this, because, as you say, it has so much money in the bank. And Hans-Peter, since 95% of the energy that is used in Norway is hydroelectric, why does it need oil and gas revenue other than simply to put more money in the bank?
No, that's a good question. But I think you're making the argument a bit too easy by comparing with heroin, because in opposition to heroin, the world needs energy. And as you say, Norway covers its energy demands through other sources mainly. But if you look at, in particularly the developing world, they are consuming huge amounts of energy and in increasing rates to bring their population out of poverty. So there is a demand for energy, and the energy must be taken from where it is. And it's then by coincidence that a lot of this is deposited under the sea level, under the seabed on the Norwegian continental shelf. So I think the tough question is, because there is a right to environment, but there's also a right to health and to life and to education and to welfare. The tough question is, how do we make this transition from burning fossil fuels to other energy sources? And how do we reduce the emissions from fossil fuels? I think that the claimants are making a good case that the world needs to stop extracting fossil fuels. And the case is not about stopping the production of the oil and gas that has already been found and that is under production. The case is against opening up new fields. And okay. I think there's a strong case that one should at least compensate when one does that. And I think that would, if the claimants win this case, it wouldn't necessarily mean that Norway would have to stop extracting new energy sources. But it would mean that they would have to compensate for example, by capturing and injecting CO2 in the deposits that are available for that, or other compensating measures. Because we need
let's go to Andreas, because I want to talk about, because that's going to cost some money, Hans-Peter. That is going to cost to do those compensatory measures that you suggest. So let's talk about money. Here's the Norwegian Prime Minister, Erna Solberg, saying if we lose the growth potential of this industry, we will also lose much of the momentum in Norway's transformation. It's not going to be as easy as just saying you can't, Andreas, you can't have the licenses, you cannot drill for oil. It's going to hurt Norway.
Yes, and as I say, I mean, it's going to hurt to transition away from the fossil economy for every country in the world. But we need to do it. If Norway is not the country, then I would really want to ask the people who wants more oil drilling in Norway, which country should let their oil stay in the ground? Yeah.
Let's go to something that I heard about just before we came on air. More licenses were announced this week ahead of the court ruling. What sort of danger do you think, Andreas, that presents?
Well, if they find oil here, this is talk about oil far, far into the future, perhaps to the next century. Erna Solberg, the Prime Minister of Norway, she has said that the person who is going to stop oil drilling hasn't been born yet. So we talk about oil far into the future, when the world has made a commitment to stop climate emissions after 2050. I think that's quite crazy. So I really only see two scenarios. Either way, the world meets its climate goals. And if we do that, then Norway may have used billions of kroners looking for oil, creating oil platforms and digging up oil that the world doesn't need, that the world doesn't want, because...
Can I just throw this one in there? This week, Vladimir Putin and the head of Rosneft, the massive Russian energy company, announced, I think it was an $83 billion Vostok oil project in the Arctic. If Norway doesn't get it, somebody else will. In this case, it's the Russians that want their share.
No, the Russians won't look for the oil that's inside of Norwegian territory. That would be no, they're not going to do that. And I, of course, want to support Russian environmentalists in their fight against Russian oil. I think that the only way we can really win against climate change is if everyone goes together and starts leaving oil in the ground.
Okay, Hilde-Marit, we're coming towards the end of the program. I've got time for at least one question with you. I hope for another one with Hans-Peter. What about the fact that a report that was kept secret showed that this oil exploration wouldn't be profitable anyway?
No, but when we started the oil adventure in Norway, they said that Statfjord A, who was one of the first that Norway did by themselves, it would never, ever be a success. And it took 12 months. So maybe it's not going to be 12 months, but I don't believe that anyone in our branch is going to are going to use their money and not having something back, because they know very much how to earn money.
All right, I understand that. Hans-Peter, what's the result going to be, do you think?
Oh, I think that's very difficult to predict. I think that most probably because of the consequences and because of the novelty of the thought of the courts interfering into the political decisions on how to save the climate, I think that most probably they won't give a ruling that stops these licenses. But who knows? I mean, we have examples from other courts. Recently, just a couple of days ago, the French Conseil d'Etat gave a ruling with possible far-reaching implications for French policy on climate change, and the Dutch Supreme Court did that a year ago. So they might come up
just a quickie to end with. If it does go against the groups that want this overturned, what will it say about Norway's commitment to the Paris Climate Agreement?
Well, basically, the Paris Accord puts the responsibility to reduce emissions on each state according to the emissions that are from the state's territory. But here we're talking about emissions that are really from other states' territory. So I think it doesn't really affect the Norwegian commitments under the Paris Accord.
I suppose it all depends.
Doing too little anyway, but it's.
If only we had time for a full legal judgment, Hans Peter. Thank you very much indeed. We have run out of time. Thank you for taking part in the show, Hilde-Marit and Andreas and Hans Peter. We thank you very much indeed, and maybe time to come back a little bit later when we find out exactly what the judgment is going to be. From me, David Foster, thank you, wherever you happen to be watching this edition of Roundtable. You can pick up more on our YouTube channel. But for now, from me and the team,